They tried to humiliate me, but my calm response shocked the entire family. Welcome, this is Voice of Deborah and I share true life stories. I'm 53 years old, and I've learned that silence can be the loudest weapon you'll ever wield. But that Easter Sunday, standing in my sister-in-law's pristine dining room with 20 pairs of eyes boring into me, I didn't know if my silence would save me or destroy me. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because what happened that day was the culmination of something far more sinister than a family dispute. 3 months earlier, my husband David died of a sudden heart attack. We'd been married for 28 years, and his death shattered me in ways I still can't fully articulate. But grief, I discovered, is a luxury not everyone can afford when there's a will involved. David had been successful, very successful. He'd built a commercial real estate company from nothing, and when he died, he left everything to me. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. His younger brother Marcus had worked for the company for 15 years, and David had always paid him generously, but the will was clear. I inherited everything. Marcus's wife, Patricia, called me 2 weeks after the funeral. "We need to talk about David's wishes," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. His real wishes, not what's written in that document. I should have seen it coming then. But what she said next changed everything. David told Marcus he wanted him to have the business. He just never got around to changing the will. You know how he was, always procrastinating about paperwork. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. If David wanted that, he would have put it in writing. He was meticulous about his business affairs. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Patricia laughed, this thin, cutting sound that made my skin crawl. "We'll see about that, Rebecca. We'll see." Over the next month, the pressure mounted. Marcus stopped returning my calls about business matters. Patricia spread rumors at church that I was being greedy, that I was dishonoring David's memory by not doing the right thing. David's mother, Helen, started calling me daily, crying about how I was tearing the family apart. I stood firm, not because I didn't love them but because I knew David. He'd shown me the will himself just 6 months before he died. "Everything goes to you," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "Marcus is taken care of, but you're my wife. You're who I trust." But here's what I didn't know yet, what was being planned behind closed doors while I mourned. The first red flag appeared on a Tuesday morning. I received a letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, claiming to represent the interests of David's estate and surviving family members. The letter suggested there were irregularities in the will and that a legal challenge was being prepared. My hands shook as I read it. The funeral expenses had been enormous. David's life insurance was still in probate. I had maybe 4 months of savings to live on, and now I'd need to hire a lawyer to defend what was rightfully mine. That's when Emma called. Emma was my daughter, 26 years old, living in Seattle with her boyfriend. She was David's stepdaughter. I'd been married once before, briefly in my 20s, but David had raised Emma from the time she was 2. He'd loved her as his own, paid for her college, walked her down the aisle at her wedding that never happened when she called it off at the last minute. "Mom," she said, and I could hear she'd been crying. "I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me." My heart stopped. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Uncle Marcus contacted me," he said. "He said you're trying to steal his inheritance. He said Dad promised him the business and you're blocking him out of greed. He offered me $50,000 if I'd sign a statement saying I heard Dad tell you he wanted Marcus to have the company." I couldn't breathe. But what happened next made me question everything I thought I knew about my own family. "I told him to go to hell," Emma continued, her voice fierce now. "But Mom, that's when he said something really weird. He said, 'Your mother's not who you think she is. Ask her about the life insurance policy she took out on David 3 months before he died.'" The room spun. "What life insurance policy?" "That's what I said." "But Mom, is there?" "Did you?" "No," I whispered. "The only life insurance policy was the one David had through his company. I didn't take out anything." "That's what I thought. But Mom, why would he say that?" What if he's trying to build a case that you had something to do with Dad's death? The phone nearly slipped from my hand. David had died of a heart attack. The medical examiner had been clear. But I suddenly understood what Marcus was doing. He wasn't just trying to take the business. He was trying to make me look like a murderer. For 3 weeks I barely slept. I hired a lawyer who specialized in estate litigation. Her name was Jennifer Chen, and she was sharp as a knife and twice as expensive. I showed her the letter, told her everything Marcus had said to Emma, explained the mounting pressure from the family. "They're trying to rattle you," Jennifer said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "The question is why? If they had a legitimate claim, they'd just file it. This psychological warfare suggests they're building toward something bigger." "Like what?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Have you checked your bank accounts lately? Your credit?" I hadn't. I'd been so consumed with grief and fighting off Marcus's claims that I hadn't looked at anything beyond the basic bills. That night I logged into our joint bank account, and what I found made my blood run cold. Someone had been making withdrawals. Small ones at first, 200 here, 300 there. But in the last 2 weeks, there had been transfers totaling nearly $40,000 to an account I didn't recognize. The transactions were dated after David's death, all of them approved with my supposed digital signature. My hands trembled so badly I could barely dial Jennifer's number. "Someone's stealing from me," I said when she answered. "Someone who has access to my banking information. Call the bank first thing in the morning," Jennifer said. "Report it as fraud. And Rebecca, change every password you have. Tonight." I spent that night in the dark, sitting in David's office, trying to understand how this had happened. Who had access to my information? Who would do this? Then I remembered. Marcus had helped David set up the online banking 2 years ago. They'd done it together one Sunday afternoon while I was visiting my mother. David had written down all the passwords in a notebook he kept in his desk drawer. I pulled open the drawer. The notebook was gone. But what I found instead changed the entire trajectory of this nightmare. Tucked behind where the notebook had been was a USB drive I'd never seen before. It was labeled in David's handwriting. "For Rebecca. Open if anything happens to me." My heart hammered as I plugged it into the computer. The drive contained a single video file dated January 15th, 3 months before David's death. Click play. David's face filled the screen and I gasped. He looked exhausted, worried, older than I'd seen him in years. "Becca," he said, and his use of my nickname made tears spring to my eyes. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and I need you to know the truth about Marcus." I leaned closer to the screen. 6 months ago, I discovered Marcus has been embezzling from the company. It's sophisticated, hidden in about a dozen shell accounts, but it totals about $300,000 over the last 5 years. I confronted him. He cried, he begged. He said he'd made bad investments and was trying to hide it from Patricia. He promised to pay it back. David rubbed his face, and I saw how much this had hurt him. I gave him a chance because he's my brother. But I set up monitoring software on the company accounts. 2 weeks ago I caught him doing it again. I told him I was going to the police. That's when he threatened me, Becca. He said if I reported him, he'd make sure you paid for it. He said he had ways of making you look guilty, that he'd been preparing for this possibility. My blood turned to ice. But the next thing David said stopped my heart completely. "I think he might try to kill me." I know that sounds insane, but the way he looked at me when I told him I was going to the police. "Becca, I'm scared. I've documented everything on this drive. Bank records, emails, recordings of our conversations. If something happens to me, take this to the police. Don't let him get away with this. And Becca, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could save my brother and protect you. I was wrong." The video ended. I sat in the dark, David's face frozen on the screen, and something crystallized inside me. Marcus hadn't just been embezzling. He'd known David was going to turn him in. And 3 weeks after David made this video, My husband had died of what everyone said was a natural heart attack. What if it wasn't natural at all? The next morning I drove straight to Jennifer's office with a USB drive. She watched the video twice, her expression growing darker each time. "This is enough for a criminal investigation," she said. "But Rebecca, you need to be very careful. If Marcus suspects you have this." "He already suspects something," I said. "That's why he's trying to discredit me, steal from my accounts, turn the family against me. He's covering his tracks." "There's something else," Jennifer said slowly. "I did some digging after our last conversation. David's autopsy was routine, just standard procedure for a sudden death. But there's a toxicology report that shows elevated levels of potassium in his blood." "What does that mean?" "On its own, nothing necessarily. High potassium can cause heart attacks, but it's also a naturally occurring element. But if someone injected a potassium solution..." She paused. "It would cause cardiac arrest and be nearly impossible to detect unless someone was specifically looking for it." The room tilted. But I couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. "We need to go to the police," I said. "We will. But first let's talk strategy. Marcus is going to fight back, and he's going to do it through the family. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the last 3 months. The isolation, the whispered accusations, the way David's mother had stopped calling me by name and just referred to me as that woman. I thought about how Marcus had tried to bribe my own daughter to lie about me. "I'm ready," I said. What I wasn't ready for was the Easter gathering. Patricia had organized it, of course. A big family dinner to come together and heal, in the wake of David's passing. She'd called me personally, her voice saccharine sweet. "Rebecca, we've all been under so much stress. Let's just have one day where we can be a family again. Please come." For David. I should have said no. Jennifer advised me not to go. But something stubborn in me refused to hide. And there was a part of me that wanted to see Marcus's face, to look him in the eye knowing what I knew. So that Easter Sunday, I drove to Patricia and Marcus's house with a USB drive in my purse and a recording device Jennifer had given me tucked into my jacket pocket. The house was full when I arrived. David's mother, his 2 sisters and their families, cousins I hadn't seen in years, and right in the center of it all, Marcus and Patricia, playing the perfect hosts. Marcus saw me first. Something flickered across his face, fear maybe or calculation. Then he smiled. "Rebecca," he said, crossing the room with his arms open. "I'm so glad you came." I let him hug me, and it took everything in me not to recoil. Dinner started normally enough. People ate, talked about nothing important, carefully avoided mentioning David or the elephant in the room, the will. Then, just as dessert was being served, Marcus stood up and tapped his glass. But what he said next would expose everything. "I want to propose a toast," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "To family, to honesty, and to doing what's right, even when it's difficult." He looked directly at me and I saw it then, the trap being set. As most of you know, David's passing has been difficult for all of us. But it's been especially complicated because of questions about his final wishes. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Rebecca, I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be understanding of your grief. But I can't stay silent anymore." Helen, David's mother, was nodding. Patricia had her hand over her mouth, playing the concerned wife perfectly. "David told me multiple times that he wanted me to take over the business." "He said it to Mom, didn't you, Mom?" Helen nodded again, tears in her eyes. "He did. He told me just a month before he died that Marcus was like a son to him, that he'd built that company for Marcus to run. It was a lie and I could prove it, but I stayed silent." Marcus continued, his voice rising with fake emotion. "But there's something else. Something I didn't want to believe, but the evidence is clear." He pulled out a folder from the sideboard. 3 months before David died, someone took out a $2 million life insurance policy on him. Someone with access to his personal information. his social security number, his medical records. He slid the folder across the table to me. Inside was a copy of a life insurance application with my forged signature. The room erupted. David's sisters started shouting. Helen was crying. Patricia was comforting her, but I caught the gleam of triumph in her eyes. "I didn't sign this," I said quietly. "There's your signature," Marcus bellowed. "And there's more. Tell them, Mom. Tell them about the money." Helen looked at me with such hurt in her eyes. Marcus showed me. "Someone's been transferring money out of David's accounts. $40,000 so far. Rebecca, how could you?" "I didn't," I said, but my voice was lost in the chaos. "And the day David died," Marcus said, and now his voice broke convincingly. "Rebecca, you were alone with him. The housekeeper had the day off. No one else was there. And David was perfectly healthy. He just had a physical. His heart was fine." The implication hung in the air like poison. David's younger sister, Amy, stood up. "Are you saying Rebecca killed him?" "I'm saying," Marcus replied carefully, "that there are a lot of questions that need answers." The room exploded again. People were shouting, crying, looking at me like I was a monster. And in the middle of it all, Marcus stood there, the grieving brother seeking justice. This was his plan. Humiliate me publicly, destroy my credibility, isolate me completely. Then, when I was at my weakest, take everything. But he'd made one critical mistake. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now, perfectly calm. I connected it to Patricia's smart TV, the one they'd been so proud to show off earlier. "What are you doing?" Patricia demanded. "Answering questions," I said. And then I played David's video. The room went silent as David's face appeared on the screen. I watched Marcus's expression change from confusion to recognition to absolute horror as David's words filled his perfect dining room. "6 months ago, I discovered Marcus has been embezzling from the company." "Turn it off," Marcus said, his voice strangled. "It totals about $300,000. Rebecca, turn it off." He lunged for the TV, but his brother-in-law caught him. "Let it play," Helen said quietly. We all watched as David laid out the evidence, as he described Marcus's threats, as he expressed his fear that something might happen to him. When the video ended, no one spoke. They all just stared at Marcus, whose face had gone from red to white. But I wasn't done. "The life insurance policy Marcus just showed you. I never signed it. But I had a handwriting expert analyze it. The signature is forged, and there's proof it was initiated from Marcus's home IP address." I pulled out the report Jennifer had helped me compile. The money disappearing from my accounts. Those transactions were made using David's old passwords only Marcus had access to. "That's not," Marcus started. "And the potassium," I continued, my voice cutting through his protest. David's toxicology report showed elevated levels of potassium chloride in his system. Not enough to trigger an immediate investigation, but enough to cause cardiac arrest in someone who'd been injected with it. Helen gasped. Amy's husband was already on his phone, presumably calling the police. "You were there that morning," I said, looking directly at Marcus. "You stopped by for coffee, you said. David told me you'd argued about something, but he didn't say what. You argued because he told you he was going to the police that afternoon. And you couldn't let that happen." Marcus's face crumbled. For a moment I thought he might confess. Then he ran. He made it to the front door before 2 police officers walked in. Jennifer had called them before I'd even arrived at the house. They'd been waiting outside for my signal. The next few hours were chaos. Police questions, statements. David's family apologizing to me with tears and shame. Patricia screaming that I'd set Marcus up, until they found the burner phone in his car with searches for undetectable poisons. And, how long does potassium stay in system? Marcus was arrested that night. The evidence was overwhelming once investigators started looking. The embezzlement, the forged insurance documents, the timing of his visit the morning David died, and finally, Security footage from a pharmacy showing him purchasing syringes and potassium chloride solution the week before David's death. He'd planned it meticulously, but he'd underestimated two things: David's foresight and my determination. The trial took 9 months. Marcus was convicted of first-degree murder, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. He's serving life without parole. Patricia divorced him within weeks of his arrest. Kept the business. Emma moved back home to help me run it, and we've actually expanded. David would be proud, I think. But here's what I learned from all of this, and it's something I need you to hear. Trust your instincts. When people show you who they are, believe them. When someone tries to make you doubt your own reality, dig deeper. And when you're backed into a corner, don't let fear make you small. Marcus tried to humiliate me that Easter Sunday. He tried to paint me as a murderer in front of everyone I loved. He thought my grief would make me weak, that isolation would make me pliable. But my calm response, that simple act of playing David's video and presenting the truth, shocked them all because they'd underestimated what a woman will do to protect the memory of the man she loved. David left me that USB drive because he trusted me to be strong enough to use it. He knew that if something happened to him, I wouldn't let Marcus get away with it. And he was right. Every time I walk into the office now, I see David's photo on my desk, and I remember his last words on that video. Don't let him get away with this. Didn't David? I promise I didn't. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or pushed into a corner, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, silence can be powerful, but the truth will always be louder. Stay strong. Trust yourself. And never, ever let anyone make you doubt your own reality.